We are not unfamiliar with US policy towards Iran in the final days of a departing US administration, the infamous October surprise, of course. In this New York Times piece, it says that although officials left the meeting believing a missile attack inside Iran was off the table, Mr. Trump, of course, may still be looking at ways to strike Iranian assets. It is not clear, and I'm in region and speak to sources all the time, that he would have the support of his Gulf allies were he to do that. Do you believe that would dissuade him from any potential strike?
We have seen that from the GCC states, or primarily from Saudi Arabia and the UAE, there has been a very dramatic push for Trump to constantly ramp up pressure and adopt a very confrontational style, a policy towards Iran. When it has come to the brink of war, however, precisely because of them realizing that Trump ultimately is not going to be coming in support of them or defend them, and that they themselves would end up becoming the subject of Iranian counterattacks, we've seen that they've gotten a little bit of a cold feet. That is, however, different from a scenario in which the United States itself would go into war with Iran. I mean, we should not forget that MBZ, who is the de facto ruler of the Emirates, was pushing the United States back in 2010 very aggressively to take military action against Iran. We saw that through the WikiLeaks. So the history, and we saw what the former Saudi king was urging the United States to do, to cut off the head of the snake. The hesitation we have seen, I think, has more to do with the fact that they realize that if there is a war that the U.S. is not leading, the U.S. would not come to their aid and support them and defend them against Iran. But if it is a war that the U.S. itself is leading and is taking a very aggressive posture to really knock out Iran, I've not seen much evidence that the GCC states, or at least Saudi Arabia and UAE, would be opposed to that.
Well, there's certainly a narrative which is headlined by de-escalate from the UAE. The UAE's point of view. That's certainly the narrative that you hear here at present. Let's talk about
that was the narrative.
What happens.
Well,
sorry, we're talking 2020. Let's talk about a Biden administration going forward. What is your sense of how Joe Biden may lead his foreign policy with regard to Tehran? And what do you believe the perspective is from Tehran at this point?
I think the Biden administration has made it quite clear that they are looking for ways to be able to re-enter the agreement, whether that is a formal re-entry or whether that is just a compliance for compliance temporary solution. They've also made it clear that they would like to see an additional agreement on top of that, which would be a separate agreement, but nevertheless would require the JCPOA to first come back into full effect, meaning that the Iranians would have to go back into compliance as well. The question mark, I don't think, is so much as to whether that is what their desire is. The question mark, are they willing to put in the political will and move with the speed that probably is necessary to get there, mindful of the fact that the Iranians are having their elections in June of next year, which means that there's just going to be a brief window of potentially maximum 4 months to be able to get this movement. And that is coming at the same time as Biden himself will have a whole set of other issues that will compete for his attention and for the attention of his administration as a whole.
For sure. In a recent op-ed, you write, and I quote you here, Biden's window is shorter than Obama's, and the mistrust is deeper, courtesy of Donald Trump's betrayal of the nuclear deal. But he can make up for that by starting the messaging right away instead of waiting until his inauguration, by which you meant what? What sort of messaging are you referring to?
Well, the United States has a tradition of only having one president at a time, and I'm sure that President Biden or President-elect Biden would respect that. However, there are signals that can be sent right now to clarify what the intent is in order to make sure that once he is president, he doesn't have to spend the first 2 months with the Iranians just trying to clarify the intent and convince the other side that he's serious about diplomacy. That's where I think there's an opportunity for him already now to send some clear signals, perhaps with an interview with your network, to clarify that he would like to go back into a complete, comprehensive, and swift compliance for compliance deal with Iran. And I think on his first day, it would be wise of him to do some humanitarian gesture. The sanctions that the Trump administration have imposed have been devastating to the Iranian population, particularly mindful of the fact that the Trump administration intensified those sanctions in the midst of the pandemic. One of the requests the Iranians had was to be able to get a $5 billion loan from the IMF to be able to fight the virus. The United States put a stop to that. He can reverse that decision. In return, the Iranians need to do confidence-building measures in order to improve the atmosphere. Essentially, this would be investments into the atmospherics of diplomacy. Those are things that can be done right now. The Iranians can release some of the dual citizens, dual Iranian and American citizens that they've been holding unfairly, unjustly, for several years in order to improve the atmospherics and maximize the likelihood that diplomacy can be successful, given the fact that it only have a very short window to make it successful.
This is a fundamental challenge for the Biden administration. Iran's nuclear program is going to be a priority, not necessarily, as you rightly point out, its top priority, because it has a number of competing issues in what is a divided world that Biden picks up after a 4-year Trump administration. But this will be important, and it has been made clear by those who have been building foreign policy narratives for Joe Biden that the JCPOA compliance for compliance deal is something they are more than interested in reviewing, with the addition of work around the ballistics missiles program and Iran's tendencies for expansionist sort of activities around the region. Call it what you will, malign activities around the region. Is that going to be something that Tehran is going to be prepared to countenance, to sign up to? And indeed, do you expect that there will be regional players involved in any negotiations going forward, not just those that sat around the table with Tehran the last time?
I think for any successful add-on agreement, I think it's very important to separate this one from the JCPOA. There first needs to be a nuclear agreement that both sides are adhering to and respecting, and then there is an opportunity to address these other very, very important issues. For that negotiation, I actually believe it is essential that the Saudis, the Emiratis, and others from the region are at the table as well, because it's going to be directly about their security, but it's also going to be about their policies. If there's going to be demands on the Iranians in terms of their ballistic missile, which I think is completely legitimate to raise, then rest assured there's also going to have to be a conversation and a negotiation about the massive amount of weaponry that the Saudis and the Emiratis are buying from the United States, or their involvement in parts of the region, call it what we may, malign or whatever, but kidnapping the Lebanese prime minister or the UAE's involvement in Libya, etc. All of those things need to be on the table in order for us to finally be able to have some sort of a new arrangement in the region that does not necessarily solve everything and does not necessarily right away bring about peace, but creates rules for how these countries will interact with each other and how they will resolve their conflicts. There are no such deconflicting mechanisms in place right now, and we cannot create those if it's only the US and Iran at the table. The other countries have to be at the table as well, but it also means that their policies will also have to be on the agenda.
Fascinating. Good to have you on. Your insight is extremely important as we begin to get a sense, develop, talk about and explore what we might see as a Joe Biden foreign policy going forward. Less than 70 days to go until inauguration, of course. Trita, thank you.